So I wanted to start off with what the questions that were submitted, and then inshallah, once if we have time afterwards, people can ask questions. I know people are putting questions in the chat, but some people submitted questions earlier. So we're going to try to go through those first. I'm going to start off with one of the, I think, simpler questions.
Is it possible, brother? I wanted just like, I suppose, 10 to 15 minutes just to conclude the final stages of our investigation, which I will be summarizing, but inshallah, then we can get to those questions just to kind of lay the scene for those questions as to, okay, well, now why Islam specifically? Before the Q&A, is that okay?
Yeah, it is okay. And we'll go from there, inshallah. So we'll spend the first 10 minutes, inshallah, going over, and then we'll go to the Q&A, of course, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan, brother.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, because I don't want to leave everyone hanging on this, okay, you know, there's one God who created us with an intention and purpose. Now what, right? So now what's going on? Well, at this point, people's interests, if we have started from a position of not knowing anything at all, to reaching this point, we'd be quite fascinated to know, okay, well, what is now the purpose of life, the point of this lecture? How do we know it? And what can we conclude from it? So again, if we look at what we are observing in the universe. Now remember, I never assumed that what we were observing was 100% an accurate model of what exists in a material world, because in case you get those ultra skeptics that would say, well, you know, how would you know what you're seeing is exactly accurate anyway, or what your model of the world is correct, for want of a better way of putting it. But whatever the model of the world is, notice I haven't mentioned anything from observation in our accounts of physics to support anything, any conclusion as of yet, because whatever we observe, these things we're always going to reach this conclusion. We're always going to reach this conclusion for definite. I do find it interesting that in the Quran it says that Allah made the universe bil haqq, right? So in truth, almost it's a reassurance that we are not observing something that's false, right? It's not like some false simulation that doesn't have any real reality. It's quite interesting. But we're not going to assume the Quran is true just yet in our investigations. We're gonna continue to see what else we can deduce. So what we observe from what we see is obviously fascinating. We see that there's inanimate objects, things that are not living. So, and what do these things do? Well, they generally they change and they move and they form composite structures and make macro structures. What we know, obviously, subatomic particles form atoms form molecules form what we can see on our level of observation, which is substances, and of course we see energy, radiation, and we see the fundamental forces that are observed. In a way, whatever those things are, we are observing change, and also we're observing there are things which are finite. What's quite fascinating is that the creator of the universe can make things which are, you think, well, he's infinite, unlimited, and yet he can make things which are not him, which are opposite of him, different from him, which change, which they are subject to change in themselves. They are limited in what they are, and he can make them. Right? He can make that which is not himself. I mean, sure, you could say, well, as you know, if you're going to, let's say, be a wood carver and you're going to carve something out of wood, you're carving something that's not, you're not made of wood, so you're making something. Well, firstly, you're not making wood from nothing, but let's follow the metaphor of this. You're actually making something, you're carving something, you're shaping something that's basically made out of matter like you are, and fundamentally the same kind of subatomic particles. Remember, all elements, they might be different, but they're still made out of electrons and at some point, protons. Some might have neutrons, some don't, but at least a proton, right? So these things, and then quarks and leptons and so on and so forth. Anyway, so ultimately speaking, everything in life is changing, and it is, or not in life, but everything in the universe is changing and is limited. And its very existence, just its existence, is a demonstration of the creator's ability to create. Right. So that's the first thing. That must be then the fundamental reason that all things share. We're made of this inanimate matter. We're made of obviously the same lifeless substance, right? But there is now a difference. We're not the same exact kind of thing. Let's look at the next circle, which is just life, or animate matter, right? Life that is different from non-living matter because it proactively self-preserves and it replicates its form, right? It replicates its form. That's what makes life different from inanimate matter. And this is quite fascinating because now the creator is demonstrating the ability to create multiple things of different natures now, right? So not something that's just inert and waits to be, pushed like a billiard ball or a snooker ball we have in the UK, and it just waits there and then until it gets hit and then it moves, right? We have something now that has these processes that actively or proactively tries to preserve itself. A plant will grow towards where there's more light, get its leaves to grow towards more light. Animals will seek out sustenance and food. It will be proactive and it will replicate itself, right? So it will recreate its own form, something that inanimate matter doesn't do, right? So this is quite fascinating because, again, God can not only create matter, but now can create things that proactively self-preserve and replicate. This would indicate that life has now a special subset purpose. In essence, everything's purpose is to be what it is in its most fundamental way, which is a demonstration of the creator's ability to create. However, life does this by it being what it is by proactively self-preserving itself and replicating itself, demonstrating that God can make such a thing, and therefore by doing that, this specific difference it has from normal matter or inanimate matter, non-living matter, this additional thing is an additional demonstration of God's power. Now God can make something like this that proactively replicates, not just an inert, unliving piece of matter. Now, something else that we notice is it has consciousness, right? Consciousness. And consciousness is quite fascinating, mainly because there is no naturalistic way to explain it. I know that the atheists would say, well, there's no way to explain it yet. However, let's actually think through and understand that it will be impossible to explain. This is formally called the hard problem of consciousness. I'm just going to put that down in the comments section. Oops, I keep sending it privately to the organizers. So here's it is on everyone. So it's called the hard problem of consciousness. They can't explain why. Where does something see itself within matter, within substance or energy? Where is this? What is doing the observing? Right? Where is this observer residing or existing? Right? Well, what's going on? If something is okay, your sensory organs are reporting information back to the brain. You have obviously a physical brain, but what's observing you doing the thinking? What's observing the receiving of these signals? If you have a camera attached to a computer, sure, the camera will receive external stimuli and send it to the computer to process according to its program. Fine, but there's nothing observing within the computer, nothing experiencing that electrical signal, nothing experiencing the processor process that signal. We have it, and we can only assume that animals have it too, only because they seem to react similar to us, and so on. Now, a plant, it might react to certain stimuli, it might react against certain predators by releasing chemicals against aphids and so on and so forth. But when it gets eaten by an aphid, it doesn't experience anything other than stimuli of possible obviously predator, but it doesn't feel it on an experiential level. Whereas when we feel something which we are conditioned to proactively to avoid or to try to escape from, that experience we call suffering or pain, right? And when we are that motivational force as life, the motivational force within life that plants would experience, but not would have, but not experience. We have that experience that drives us to seek something, and when we get that, we are rewarded with pleasure. Right? It's what we call pleasure. Whereas a plant doesn't seem to get pleasure from receiving sunlight and obviously absorbing nutrition from the soil. But we have something additional, and we can only assume that animals have the same. There's no reason not to assume so, but it's not important, obviously, if you want to be skeptical and believe that animals are just robots. Some people did believe that in the past, like robots, let's just say, right? But we know, or at the very least, if you want to be ultra skeptic, which they might say, well, how do you know any other human being exists or even has a conscience? Maybe it's just you, possibly so, but you at the very least, you have a conscience, and that's all you need to show. That's all you need to be able to prove consciousness exists in the universe. Anyway, so consciousness, the ability to observe and experience the creation of the entire universe. Now, if the entire universe is a demonstration of the creator's power to create, then consciousness is a demonstration of the power of the creator to create something that can witness its own creation, and at the very minimum, that's what consciousness is. Now, humans are an additional. We have one up on animals, which is we have a distinct ability of metacognition, otherwise known as thinking, for short. We have the ability to construct mental models, such as being able to deduce God's existence by observing his effect. Right? We can deduce things that we don't actually see or observe, whereas an animal usually learns it only by experience. Like if an animal sees someone take out a gun and doesn't know what it is, and then hears a loud bang and its friend gets shot, if it's a rabbit or something, then it will know that the next time it sees someone take out something that looks like a human, that looks like a boomstick, as they call it, right? It would instinctually connect that bad things happen when it sees something, this boomy stick, and will then run off, right? So it makes that connection. But us, we can actually deduce things before we detect them. If you want to use a more elaborate example, the Higgs boson was deduced by mathematical prediction before it was detected. Likewise, black holes as well were deduced before they were detected, and so on and so forth, and many gravitational bodies. That's just high-level examples, of course, but you would know that if you hear a noise from outside your house, let's say you hear a noise of a gunshot noise, you would be able to deduce without needing to observe exactly what was happening. Not 100% certain. It could be someone playing a gunshot on a movie, or very loud on their television. But I'm just saying that you can deduce that there's basically something like a gunshot being done, so occurring some way, whether it's on TV, fictional, or scarily in real life. So you're able to construct mental models and make deductions or inductions based on those models, as well as abductions, right, which is producing explanations for observable phenomena, which is also the third form of logic you probably haven't heard of. I would type it in, Google it. Abduction, not to be confused with taking people against their will, right? So please don't make that mistake. Anyway, so yeah, and please don't repeat on Twitter. Abdullah's teaching us about abduction. Anyway, so what can we deduce? Well, we can deduce that we are experiencing, the creator intended us to experience the universe to bear witness, because that's what consciousness is. It's witnessing, to bear witness to the universe and the demonstration of his power. So then we can now make a deduction without any scripture that our purpose is to bear witness to the creator's power. Or in a more simple language, which you've been told in seminaries, of course, to glorify or worship God. But But that doesn't convey. Well, I mean, it conveys the same concept, but you might understand it in a different way. Whereas it's the what's really going on here is that we're just basically we're bearing witness to God's power, and He intended us to be able to do that by giving us this ability. But there is now one other thing. Now there's something else going on, which is we have free will. Or at least we have this experience of the ability to choose. Right, we at least have this experience. Now I know it's disputed amongst certain materialists, and we can get to that. And I there's not enough time for me to demonstrate how the arguments against free will are actually fall down. Even the so-called empirical research, I'd say the empirical research vindicates the Islamic view. But if you want to know more about that, you have to go on the course, because it's detailed, and you'll need to be in a more academic or setting. Even it doesn't matter what if you're in, was it secondary school, or was it high school, or college, or university? You need to be able to. You have to sit down and see the evidence for yourself. Because I don't want you just to take something I say, obviously, without question, right? So that is not enough time. So just take it from me. There's no evidence to show that humans don't have free will, but we have the experience of choice. We have a perception that we have the ability to make choice. So that we can only conclude that the Creator intends us to have this perception of choice at the very least. If you want to be ultra skeptic about it, the Creator intended us to have the perception of choice. What does that mean then, right? Also, that we are quite sophisticated creatures. All the creatures seem to know how to live and survive and do what they need to do, from ants to monkeys. But human beings, how are we meant to live? What are we meant to do? I mean, sure, survive and reproduce and so on, but we have the capacity for so much more interaction beyond just survival and reproduction. And we also have some kind of instinct or drive in us to want to connect with, well, when I say connect, but to do something as part of a greater picture, right? For want of a better way. Some people call it the sanctification instinct, a spiritual instinct. Even atheists would have it, where for them, it's just the universe, or being part of this, investigating the cosmos. In a way, that's their God. But everyone seems to need to have a God of some kind, a greater story beyond themselves, that they are just a part of that story. So the desire to be part of a narrative is a more fundamental thing. Other creatures don't seem to have that we can observe anyway. So all these characteristics show that that the fact that they are present in us means that it is required. So, but also, lastly, if consciousness can't arise from material, from the matter, from substance, it would. I can't get into this now because there's limited time. But any attempt to demonstrate it in reality produces an infinite regress fallacy. Like, what's observing you see behind your eye? If it's someone else, what's observing in that person? What's inside, and then what's inside that person? What's inside that person? What's inside that person? It's called a homunculus fallacy. Homunculus fallacy, which is an infinite regress of observers, right? Which atom is doing the observing? Which quantum particle is doing the observing? What is the observer? Where is this observer located, right? So someone asked a question, how do you know there's an afterlife? Well, in every culture, there's been a belief of an afterlife, by the way, and a type of heaven and hell from cultures that don't seem to have had much connection to each other, from ancient Chinese culture, ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, obviously to ancient Greeks. Fun facts for everybody: for anyone who thinks that ancient Greeks, how comes they didn't believe in one God? The God of Moses. And the kingdom of the ancient kingdom of Israel, being based in the land of Canaan, was in about 1200 BC. Homer and Hesiod, writing the first kind of, you could say, Greek poems that starts to summarize the Greek religion, occurs around 700 BC. So basically, the ancient kingdom of Israel is older than Greek religion, or than the official canonization of Greek religion, ancient Greek religion, at the very least, arguably about 500 years before before ancient Greek. So Judaism came first, right? Before before the ancient Greeks. Just so you know. Anyway, where was that? Yes. So if matter can't, but the more common, let's say common sense argument is, if matter can't produce consciousness, then what's producing it? Yeah, it might reside in the mind, but if matter can't produce consciousness, then consciousness must pre-exist a human brain. And likewise, if matter can't produce consciousness, it can't maintain consciousness either, which means that when the brain dies, when you die, your consciousness will simply continue without the brain. And whatever you want to call that, that would have to be the afterlife. Right? I'm simplifying it, of course, because there might be an atheist here saying, I want to hear you talk about some data from scientific experiments and discussions. And I want to say, like, that's in the course, right? But suffice to say, there's no explanation for it. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. There's no explanation for it, and rationally speaking, there can never be an explanation for it. Someone said, but where would the consciousness be after that? That would be a question that we're going to now kind of attempt to answer. So what we know is we can see we've now kind of produced all this evidence. Now we've seen all these observations. Now made all these observations. We know that humans are very complex. We have ability to make models. What we have a desire to be part of a narrative. Where's the narrative going to come from? Because you can't deduce more than that. You can't go beyond that. The creator of the entire universe, on this tiny speck, this ball of dust, willed that we would exist with all these faculties to gaining knowledge and also the ability to speak and have language. Again, where did language come from, right? Because it's not spontaneously generated by human beings, right? I mean, anyone who studies psychology here, you probably know of kids raised in the wild. No one teaches them language; they don't develop it themselves. And if they don't learn language by the age roughly of 15 years old, they can never be taught it. Even if they're discovered by other human beings, they can't learn it. They just remain feral, like animals. So where does language come from? That's an interesting question too, right? Where's that? Which is the ability to it helps us categorize information that produces thought, right? So what's going on there? What we can deduce is that if the creator gave us all these things by intent, then there would have to be, if he gave us hardware, right, that can process programs, then he would have had to have created software. Otherwise, the creator would be contradicting himself to make us with this stuff, but then not make software that it seems designed to. And you can deduce that there has to be software, there has to be information conveyed to us. But how is it conveyed? Because it's not internal in our genetics. We're not born with inspiration of this, and so then it can only ever come from some kind of message or messenger. And of course, then if we have free will, presumably whatever message we're given, we have a choice over that message, right? We have a choice to follow that message or not follow that message because we have the ability to make free will, and that seems to be a reasonable expectation to obviously to expect, in essence, right? From anything we see. So now we have to look. Okay, well, what would be the best way of send this message to us? Would it be that God would send some kind of inspiration to us in our head? If that's the case, then obviously we wouldn't be able to have free will, because if everyone is programmed to follow a particular a set of laws for human nature, then you wouldn't, and it was programmed into you, you wouldn't have any free will on the matter. You'd just be robots doing that stuff. And what's the point of giving you free will, but then kind of taking it away from you? Would God appear to us and tell us what he wants from us? Well, if he was to do so, then again we wouldn't have any free will, right? It would contradict giving us free will in the first place. The only way we could ever it would be meaningful and it would be consistent with what the faculties is giving us is if it was sent via message, at least to one to one person or a group of people, and then conveyed to us via those people, right? Could it be angels? Could he maybe send us message via, let's say angels, let's say creatures which are not human but are intermediaries, right? Well, possibly so, but we would have to learn how to live by that way of life. And if they are not like us, it would be hard to follow them by example, because it's like it's easy for you as an angel to tell us that you don't, about sexual desires when and controlling them when you don't have them. Right? Like, what do we do? How do we do it? Like, how do we live? We need to learn. Someone we can apprentice from would be the most optimal method. Okay, so now we've made all these deductions. We now have to look at what's the available candidates out there of anyone of making claims of receiving communication from this creator. If we remove everything that contradicts what we've deduced, so remove polytheism, remove deism, remove obviously atheism, obviously, and any other religion where the creator is anthropomorphized as a human being or a creature, we remove that from the equation. What we're reasonably left with is Judaism and Islam. Christianity kind of went wayward when they started to worship Jesus, so or you could say Unitarian Christianity. But then the problem with Judaism and Unitarian Christianity is that we're not really sure, and we have evidence to believe that the message or what we've been conveyed from them is not entirely accurate. We don't have firm knowledge. We know that Christianity has been indeed corrupted by pagan customs, by historical evidence. Again, that's something we can go into in depth and detail. Judaism would be the only candidate left. However, there remains in Judaism some problems in the contradictions in the text, which would suggest that the text has been somewhat tampered with and might not be an authoritative communication. So, and it seems very parochial. It's for the tribes of Israel and not for all mankind. Yes, they do believe in something called the Noahide laws, but they're very simplified. And surely human nature needs a sophisticated system to manage and organize it. Now, that was the process that I took that was the thinking process I took at about 14 years old, from 10 to 14 years old. That made me arrive at Islam by process of elimination. But after further thinking about it for many, many years, I realized that the Islamic explanation accounts for all these things. That everything, that Islam is the only way of life that explains all this phenomena that we have deduced rationally. Speaks about an afterlife, speaks about accountability, speaks about consequences, about punishment and reward for worshipping, for fulfilling your purpose. I'm gonna answer a question that was raised. Actually, there was about 4 or 5 questions related to heaven and hell, and so in essence, this is a Q&A we're going to go into. But people ask, why is heaven and hell involving pain and pleasure? What's going on? Well, as conscious creatures, when you fulfill your kind of drives as it was intended you do, you get rewarded with pleasure. And when you are frustrated, your drives are frustrated, your instinctual drives are frustrated, either by imminent threat or by inability to get what you want, you feel pain or suffering. So if we have pleasure and pain in this life, rewarding us for our purpose and not fulfilling our purpose, or one of the levels of our purpose, why not in the afterlife? Why was that a big jump? Why? Of course, we should expect then that accountability for our actions based on free will would involve the exact same mechanisms that we have in this life, in this conscious experience that we're experiencing now. Pain and pleasure would be the same thing. Some would say, what about why would you have someone being punished with fire or pain? And so fire is actually the one of the optimal ways to induce pain. In essence, it's the destruction of our nerves and everything like this. It's pain in its purest form, and likewise in many belief systems, there is a paradise where the rewards would be essential, and also something more fulfilling inside us, a deep, you call it spiritual fulfillment, but I don't want to use words which can't be precisely defined without having time to define them. But anyway, so heaven and hell and afterlife would be exactly what I would expect from a revelation, a claim of a revelation. In fact, I'd be quite confused if there wasn't that in a claim to a revelation. We have someone asked why did God create Iblis or Shaitan, knowing that he would that this person would go against God and rebel and be evil, so to speak, or evil meaning going against the will of God, right? Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? Which is, firstly, free will doesn't mean anything if people actually can't choose to do the opposite. Now, what do I mean by mean anything, right? Well, here's the interesting question, which is, I think that free will is one of the greatest glorifications of God. Great, as in its very existence. Why is that? Well, you have this infinite entity or being that controls everything. And you say, well, if it has such infinite power, can it create something that can go against it? Its will. But it controls everything. How is it even possible? Right? But here's the thing, is that God's power is unlimited, and his knowledge is unlimited, that he can create things, know what they would do if they had true free will, and bring their decisions into existence, knowing that this is what they would do if they were separate, independent things from himself. And so, how can something make some? So subhanAllah, if you think about it, this is really, I always find this like amazing. Is you have this infinite being that nothing is independent of, and yet it is able to make something act in some small way, almost like it is independent of him. As in to make a choice to go against him, or rebel it, or say no, or disregard him, right? So free will itself is one of the greatest creations of God. It's a demonstration of his power to do something which is almost would seem like it was contradictory, but it's not, because at the same time he controls the decisions made by the thing, and he actually brings about that decision by his permission. Right? He brings it about, because you depend on God to basically make your decisions, and to bring about those decisions. But they're still your decisions, because God's knowledge is not limited to what he chooses, but he would know that if there was something that could choose independent of him, what it would do, and he would bring it about. God has the ability to countenance hypotheticals, meaning he has the ability or knowledge to know hypotheticals, even things that he hasn't made. Evidence of this this is consistent rather with what we see in the Quran, where we see that in the Quran it says that if there was not a God, you would have seen the universe basically in this kind of chaos, as each God takes away from the creation what they made, and so on. So if you see this jostle, so in the author of the Quran, whoever it is, seems to understand that God knows hypotheticals and can understand on things which are impossible to exist, and yet he would know exactly what would happen if they did exist, because his knowledge isn't limited to only what he makes, right? Or only that which he controls by direct puppets, right? So free will is an amazing glorification of God, and that's why we could say, someone asked what was the value of life. I say, well, the value of it is really just the demonstration of the ability of the creator to create and to do things which but he could do things which were far beyond just making mindless, inanimate matter. But he makes consciousness. He makes things that can actually realize they exist and realize he exists, and also make things that do that and be able to say no to him. Right now, and then lastly, to finish up before I open up for more general questions, someone said about why would God punish people for making decisions against that reject him, and why is it that we are so fallible, and why are we going to get punished for our fallibility? Like, that's not fair, isn't it? Surely not. Right? It's not fair. Well, here's the thing. the elegance of Islam is or at least this we're examining as a revelation. It's balance on this matter. First and foremost, if you fulfill your purpose, you get rewarded, right? Because you're driven to do that. You're created with that drive. You get reward. You seek reward. Fulfilling your purpose, you get frustration or pain if you don't. The afterlife is just the same. If you chose to reject God, reject your purpose, and your rejection was, you made it intrinsic to yourself. You made it that you are going to make your own desires your God, and that involves a comprehensive rejection of God. Then in the afterlife, your rejection of God will, or God's rejection of you, and rejection of you getting your fulfillment will also be comprehensive in a commensurate manner. Likewise, also people say, well, we're so fallible. What's going on? Do you not wonder why? And I expect to see this when I encountered Islam. Was almost every surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the author of this Quran, is reminding us how merciful He is. He understands us making sin. In a Hadith Qudsi, even expects us to. And despite the fact that we are diverted from fulfilling our purpose on occasions, that we always come back to Him, that we don't get swayed. What's better, right? So someone who basically is, swimming around on a beach, on a clear ocean with no current, or somewhere where the current is trying to take them out to sea, but they keep wanting to swim back to shore, to safety, right? They have to exert effort. There's more effort being exerted. Someone trying to stay next to shore, whereas someone who is next to shore and not being dragged out in the first place. Us choosing to worship God, or rather us choosing to bear witness to His power to create and and affirming Him as the creator, is itself an affirmation of His power. Right? The fact that there are things that could choose to do otherwise than what He wills, and yet they will to fulfill the purpose that He has intended for them, right? And at the same time, but for that to have any meaning, we have to be given powerful incentives not to choose to fulfill that purpose. We are creatures of the material world, and we will be subject to material causality, right? Temptation, right? Sometimes the material causality is good. Sometimes it's bad. It's like an ocean, right? Interestingly, the Arabic word qalb, meaning the heart, comes from the same root to mean like an ocean that just shifts and changes, right? You're part of this causality, and yet despite this seemingly chaotic causality, you order yourself, or you try to, as much as you can, swim against that causality and go back to the highest causality, the highest cause, right? The origin of everything, the creator. And so this is the value in life. And now the thing is this: there are so many different angles and so many different, obviously, points and evidence. But I came to the conclusion after detailed examination, hence this 10-week course I have to do, because I can't really iterate it to you here. But Islam was the only possible explanation for reality. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, some people who worship people, or look up to heroes who were ascetics and never got involved in the material world, or those who were maybe great conquerors but maybe not even involved in spirituality. You have these extreme characters that people like to look up to in history. But the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was very interesting as a character, because he was a balance of everything, and in that he showed us that you don't have to go into live your entire life in a cave as a hermit, right? And that's how you get to God, or live your entire life in one extreme or the other, but to be a balanced human being, that you live in this world that you were created to live in, to trade, to have neighbors or converse with them, to obviously help out family and all these things. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was exactly what you'd expect as a role model, to demonstrate for us to apprentice ourselves to learn how to actually live by our natural law. Islam said that Islam says that Islam isn't the first revelation that comes from God. It's one of many revelations from God. The commonality in religious ideas throughout history bears testimony to that between different religions that never really contacted each other. The fact, heaven and hell, the idea of one God, and then it becomes corrupted into multiple gods. All these things we see bears exactly the same to the explanation that Islam has provided of human reality. So anyway, I'm going to roughly end it there, but I'm conscious that I haven't been able to go through every single fine detail to show you with the actual evidence from these different civilizations, from history, and from many other aspects of Islam. But here's the interesting thing about the Quran. It expects you to recognize its message, right? In Surah 75, so verse 36, Surah 75, verse 36, it says, does man think that he is to be left aimless? So do you think that we were created for a joke? When clearly we were made by intention, so would be an intention behind us. And intention is a definition of purpose. That there is a greater intent behind us is the definition of purpose. What is good and bad? Good and bad is if you fulfill your purpose and you don't. You have a car. A good car is a car that fulfills its purpose. A good car to you, that is, right? That has an engine, has wheels, it works. It gets you from A to B, right? That's its purpose. It's a good car if it can do that. If the car has no engine and no wheels, it's a bad car. Why is that? Because it's not fulfilling its purpose. Good and bad could only ever be understood based on our purpose, right? And the very fact that we have, psychologists haven't obviously observed this, but anyone from any part of the world, any time in history would have known this, that we have a desire in ourselves to want to be part of a narrative or a higher story than ourselves. It's inbuilt in us. Why would the creator of the universe make it inbuilt in us? And lastly, also, scientists will say, oh, the universe is so great and vast. Many of the parts of the universe will never observe everything in the universe or directly. What's the point? Why does God make everything in the universe if we as human beings won't be able to visit it, right? Again, I say that's an assumption. You assume the universe was made for you, right? It wasn't made for you. Right, the Quran says that the creations of the heaven and the earth is greater than the creations of man, but verily man knows not, and we don't know this, right? And we don't even fathom how great the universe is, and that's exactly true. We don't, and so this is really the case. The God in the Quran is one that doesn't have finite features. Is not a creature. Does not subject to tiredness. Has sent messengers to mankind. Is merciful, always willing to forgive, knowing that we were made as creatures which, as the Quran says, incline towards the earth, but man inclines towards it. We are creatures which are heavily influenced by material causality. And yet, all that is needed to redeem ourselves is that we never give up trying to swim against that current when the causality goes in the wrong way, to get close, remain close to the shore of the creator, so to speak, and of the material purpose the natural laws that he has ordained for us to follow, and have the ability to conceptualize in our mind as ideas, as laws, and as a belief system. So in essence, Islam is the only explanation that explains all these things without contradiction. And what does the Quran say? That had it been from anything other than Allah, or the creator, God, of course, you would have found in it many contradiction. And I've often said it's not just contradiction within the source of the Quran, but also with reality, what you observe in the natural world. And every other religion that talks about, whether it says the purpose of us is to get enlightenment by spending 80 years or 60 years meditating and depriving our bodies and things like that, well, that doesn't make sense, because why should it take most of your life just to discover what your purpose in life is? And why did you have to deprive your body of sustenance when it needs to eat sustenance in order to get enlightenment? And what is enlightenment? Is to understand the purpose of life. So the purpose of life is to understand the purpose of life seems kind of circular. Or reincarnation. You're meant to be learning a lesson in all your previous lives, but you can't remember anything from your past life. That doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. With types of belief system where they believe that there's something called karma in the universe. Actions are either good karma or bad karma. Well, who's measuring that, right? Who's making the measure, and what's the point of that? Or some Hindu interpretations of our purpose of life, where, well, God made us just for sport, and we were once part of God, but now we are separate from God, and we have to get back to God. Well, firstly, if we're part of God, why aren't we infinite? Secondly, how can God be made into parts when he's fundamental? Like, he's not made of their substance anyway. And how can anything that was a part of God be ignorant in the first place? And how can God change anyway? It produces contradictions. Any other concept or idea that is different from Islam produces contradictions. And that's why but I have to demonstrate all the other possibilities quite systematically, which is why I'll have that course that will be done by the Quran Institute. Inshallah, I recommend all of you to go on it, but I can't show it here today. So I'll just make an assertion, which is that Islam. I came to the conclusion that Islam is not only the best hypothesis to explain reality, which is what initially made me convert to Islam, but also the only possible explanation for reality. And please go back to the Quran and read it in light of what you've heard today. See how the author of this Quran seems to expect you to recognize it. That you should be recognizing this, right? And I'll finish up with a very interesting there was a very interesting ayat in this Quran. I want you to read it, right? Which is in Surah 67, verse 10, ayat 10. The people who are going into Jahannam, into hell, are saying, if only we had been listening or reasoning, we would not be in the companions of the fire, right? We would not be punished so. In essence, if only they had used their faculties that God had given them, they would have avoided this punishment. But they chose not to, because they chose to swerve towards the earth. They became slaves to causality and not slaves to the cause. So, barakallah feekum from listening. Thank you for your patience, and inshallah, I look forward to your questions and comments. I'm going to stay on here to answer as many questions as possible for as long as the organizers allow it. So I'm not going to go anywhere, and ideally I want to get through all your questions, every single one. So inshallah, barakallah feek for your patience, and I'll pass it to the host, Brother Hassan.
So first I'd like to appreciate everyone. I know we started around 7:50, so mashallah, mashallah for everyone, may Allah accept from everyone. I know some people sent some questions online, but we had 45 questions that were sent in previously, and I know you covered some of those questions. So if you feel like you already covered it, we can just skip it and go to the next one, and then if you have time, go to the ones in the chat, inshallah. So the first one, it's kind of a simplistic question. We can start off with this one, inshallah. Kind of just change the mode. Is that somebody asked, how can they increase their taqwa?
Okay, so increase your taqwa. You first have to understand what that means. Your taqwa, sometimes translated as God consciousness or the fear of God, is really just the acknowledgement and making it present in your mind, the realization that in essence you have this creator which you completely and totally depend on, and can do whatever he wills to you and decide whatever he wills for you, and that there is nothing else that you should be concerned about pleasing or serving or worshipping. Then this creator that knows everything you do, and every action you do won't go to waste, and every action you do is something that he will know, because he's the very one that's maintaining you doing that action and permitting you doing the action, giving you literally the permission to do that very specific action that you're doing. So once you know this, keeping it present in your mind is taqwa. I like to liken it to, there are people, many of you might be university students, right? So you might know that there's a difference between someone being told that they have exams in a couple months' time, and then when the reality is very clear to them, not very clear to them rather, they it becomes a present thought in their mind that, oh, wait a second, the exams are like next week. I have to start revising. I should stop, I don't know, wasting my time, right? So that realization, that's not realization, but that emotional agitation is taqwa. And it helps you to be motivated, right? That's what taqwa does. It helps you to be motivated, and it can go up and down like any other motivation. But generally, if you keep yourself regularly motivated by remember, there's many ways you can remember God or contemplate. From contemplation, one Sahabi used to jump into a hole and imagine that he was dead. And he imagined how regretful he would be that he didn't have any ability to make further actions. And so, and then he would realize that he wasn't dead and he could actually change his life and do good things. And so, and that he would do that. So that would be about psychological tactics to help keep you motivated. And inshallah, there are many much more accomplished motivators than myself. I'm someone who likes to, I focus on more aqliya matters, of course, because that's where currently a lot of Muslims are having trouble with. It matters to do with the intellect and understanding Islam on an intellectual basis. But of course, you're conceptualizing and internalizing of that into your subconscious, otherwise known as the nafs or the qalb. That one obviously is a point for discussion another time anyway.
All right, what is your reply that to the West is more developed because they apply Islamic values more than Muslim countries?
So the cause of decline of the Muslim civilization was because, generally speaking, in roughly, I'd say, the 15th to 16th centuries, maybe even the 17th centuries, one of the worst things that could ever happen to a civilization happened to us for a prolonged period, and that was success. So we became very wealthy, successful, and then eventually extravagant and decadent and lazy. And success is the killer. Is the killer of the mind and the killer of innovation and drive and proactiveness. Not to generalize, but have you seen that? Comfort also kills the mind, so to speak, right? So people don't tend to think much if their food is given to them and on a plate, and they don't need to think about how to get it, right? For example, to use a crude example, right? Often people have said that, maybe in America you've seen this, but certain celebrity kids, so kids of celebrities or kids of rich people, tend to be quite unsophisticated in thought because they never had to think much to get their next meal or luxury goods. And so the intellect becomes defunct because you don't need to use it as a tool anymore. You've got what you need, right? You don't need to use it as a tool to survive, develop, improve, because you've got everything you want, and and all you have to do is just be conversant and efficient at begging your parents to, or blackmailing your parents, emotionally blackmailing your parents to get you what you want, right? So it becomes the mind killer. Now, what European observers in the Muslim world observe, they always use this very typical word and very common word, which is they describe the Muslim world as decadent, which is interesting, right? Because now they describe the Muslim world as austere, right? But it's very decadent, and then it got to the point where you'd see you've probably seen these old paintings, right? There, that the buildings begin to crumble and no one's really caring about maintaining stuff. Right, they're going for a retro look, but their clothes are immaculate and amazing and full of colors and all this kind of stuff. They want to look really fashionable, right? But but when it comes to their buildings, they're going rustic, right? Let's not repair it, let's not develop it. It's authentic. I'm just joking, but this degradation of our industry began to happen. The West they learned, scientific methods from us and industrialization from us. And they took it. The New World provided lots of gold for them to basically get lots of resources, and they would come to the Muslim world with lots of gold and buy up our resources, and then say, it's okay, we can manufacture for you, and we'll manufacture cheaper for you. And then the Muslims like, okay, well, we control the trade routes, so we get money no matter what. So let's buy cheap, made in the West, right? Buy a nice cheap utility. Why make our own? Why have our own industry when we can buy from the West? And this is in the 17th century, by the way, right? And then our own industry declined, which some could argue is something happening to America now and China, but that's a different discussion. I have simplified it greatly, but what also happened is Muslim arrogance, hubris, and over time an ossification of Islamic thinking. We would get less and less sophisticated scholars as the level of thinking of Muslim society began to decline due to luxury, I would argue. And then we became more introspective and not out. And we forgot the Islamic world mission was to basically spread the message of Islam to the world, because the point is we have to give mankind its software, right? You know, the software for it, the hardware that God gave it to run the program they were meant to, or to reiterate the program that they have forgotten, got corrupted in their own. We are the reboot, so to speak. And that's what the message of Islam is meant to be conveyed to mankind. We forgot that because we got successful and we became arrogant, thinking we were superior just by calling ourselves Muslim and nothing else, right? Oh, we're just better, right? And then it justified all kinds of things, just justified slave raids into Western cities or towns and so on and so forth, taking Westerners as slaves because, they meant to serve us. No, that's not the point. You're not meant to be doing that. You're meant to be conveying the message of Islam. You're not meant to just be viewing them as you're better, you're superior, right? That's arrogance, right? So this is what happened with Islamic civilization. And then you had colonialism, because we started to degrade in our material abilities, and therefore the West outperformed us. Around the 1700s is when that shift finally happened, and they outpaced us, and then our education systems just got wiped, and our understanding of the political aspects of Islam became lost, and so on and so forth. But there's a large answer, there's a big answer to this question because it's quite obviously complex. But that being said, though, we started to degrade roughly around around 1,000 years. That was only after 1,000 years of Islam. That's a pretty good track record. It took 1,000 years of Islam before you got that degradation in the 1700s, right? So that's 1,000 years, right, of Islam. Whereas in the West, they're starting to degrade only after 800 years since their Renaissance, or since the beginning of their Renaissance in the 1200s. So it's kind of we have 200 years more than they did before we degraded, and inshallah we will revive. So anyway, but stuff like this is part of the revival, getting back to our deen, understanding why we're Muslim, why we're not any other religion, why Islam is the truth. This is the kind of things that we need to do, as well as many, many other things. But inshallah, I'll leave it there.
Okay. The next question we have here. How does the concept of determinism come in line with choice? Is everything determined? Then why are we punished for our acts? If as it was Allah who made us that way, and His deterministic path caused our wrong actions.
I would say that everything in the universe is determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through mechanisms that we don't know, we don't fully understand or know currently. Referring to the quantum world, that's the quantum world is our current frontier of our knowledge and understanding. However, that being said, I would say that our free will isn't fully determined. I would say that most of our decisions are based on calculation, yes, of costs and benefits, pros and cons, and the scientific experiments have shown that. But it is only when we're faced with two very powerful and pressing contradictory desires, like if you let's just say if you're tempted, if you let's say are an alcoholic, right, and but also unfortunately you're an alcoholic, and it's wrong because you're Muslim. So what do you do, right? When someone offers you alcohol and it's nice, and you're feeling depressed and you want to enjoy it, but you know it's wrong. Your desire for it to get you, because you get pleasure from it, and at the same time you do your desire against it because you know that it will it is against your purpose and it will be going against your higher narrative, right? As a human being, as a creation of God. Only when there's two conflicting choices, which are both, you know, you can go either way on these two, and it's not about cost and benefit because you know exactly what you'd get from drinking alcohol. You know exactly what you get if you abstain from it. You're not making the judgment between is it one type of lemonade or a different type of lemonade, which one's the better type, which lemonade would get me the best enjoyment, right? Which is probably a question you'd probably get a lot when going through Walmart, because when I went to America, the amount of choice you have there is literally mind-numbing. We have choice here, but come on, guys. How many brands of lemonade do you need? Seriously. Anyway, but that is calculation, right? Which gets me my objective. You already have an objective. How do you get to which one gets you the biggest bang for your buck, as they say, right? Which gets you that objective? Which gets you the most pleasure from these two choices? Whereas when you are faced between let's say a conflict, right? That's the only time you have real free will. That's when your free will can manifest itself. You might notice in Islam as imtihan, right? As being tested. If you're not tested, you can't manifest your free will. Basically, you need to be tested, basically. And that's precisely the point. That's precisely why you need to have tests, why God has to test you. Otherwise, you won't have free will. I want to add something else that I thought about and I didn't get to iterate it, which is there's another assumption, which is we assume that everything in this universe, just because you have the same purpose, doesn't mean that your experience of this universe was going to be exactly the same as something else that has the same purpose. Your purpose is just to bear witness to God's creation and your demonstration of God's power to create. That's your purpose. You can do it on different levels. One could be you could just be born, you know, live a few minutes and then die, and that was it. Your purpose is fulfilled like that, and that was all that God intended for you to fulfill your purpose. You can be given a lifespan of 80 years or 100 years and be tested and make choices and enact your free will. And that was how you were going to fulfill, that was the manner that God intended you to fulfill the purpose of you bearing witness to his creation of this universe and his ability to create. So just because we all have the same overall purpose doesn't mean you have the same specific way of fulfilling that purpose, that God has intended you to fulfill it. And so on. That's it. But someone asked, why did God make Shaitan who would cause evil and so on? No, everyone actually will ultimately serve God. Everyone serves God, right? The case is that those who serve God willingly and those who serve God unwittingly, right? So when God is creating Adam alayhi salam and is making and is bringing prophets amongst human beings who are going to be teaching them their purpose in life. Okay, human beings will not have really, you know, you have these revelation that's teaching people good, teaching people what they're meant to be doing, and avoiding certain bad things and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, though, that would in a way be unfair, because now you're not giving people the ability to even conceive of any information that would be about doing bad things, right? They wouldn't be conceiving of doing bad things, of choosing not to obey God, because all they've ever been given by their culture is how to obey God, and there is no conception they would conceive of or imagine even the idea of disobeying that. So Iblis, who initially was trying to prove a point because he's racist against human beings, is so as a racist against human beings who thinks he's better than us and thinks that we're just people who are disobedient, and he's going to prove it. He's going to demonstrate that we're disobedient, and he's not worth him bowing down to, so to speak, as in not worth him humbling himself because he believes he's superior. He's going to show God, although he knows God knows this, but he's going to show that Adam alayhi salam and his progeny are not worth the creation. They're not going to fulfill their purpose. There's no point to making them. Of course, and obviously the angels also, are witnessing this situation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, or at least in the Quran, and I say that because we need to, obviously, I know that someone's going to say, you haven't demonstrated fully yet by all the different, oh, that's all right. But the Quran is now saying, as an explanation that says God knows what he doesn't know, that in spite of all this temptation, and with all this temptation now that permitted by God for a force that's actively trying to swerve human beings away from God, there's going to be people who reach even greater heights of choosing God over this material, over temptation away from God. What that means is you have material temptation away from God, but now you have an additional force trying to tempt you away from God. That's not material, right? It's whispering and giving you ideas, right? In a way, you have revelation that's giving you whispering and giving you ideas, so to speak, to worship God. And so balance is for you to have free will fully manifested. You're going to have temptation whispers for you to go against God, so that you can now make that choice. And in spite with these two forces, there will be people who will excel even greater, because in spite of this, they will worship God and will bear witness to God as the creator, and his ability to create, despite all these temptations to the contrary. So Iblis, whether he likes it or not, is fulfilling God's purpose, even though he might not. Although he might rationalize that out to himself, that he's doing that. Yeah, he is just doing God's. He's an agent of God. He's just proving. He's not hating God, but he's proving God. He's proving that these people are going to be rejectors of God, and he's going to show that. But at the same time, because God tested him on his arrogance, and he felt, to reject God to God's face, so to speak, is kufr, right? Is rejection. It is rejection. It's full on rejection. To say no in the presence of God, so to speak, that's full on rejection. That he got vengeful. It's like, well, you've made me veer away. You tested me, and you made me veer away from, you made me swerve away from obedience. So I'm going to take them with me. It's revenge. It's vindictiveness, basically. So, which is interesting, because in Christianity, or in Christian conceptions of God and demons and all this kind of stuff, Lucifer, or Satan, quote unquote, just seems to be bad, right? Just like, I'm going to be bad. I'm just going to be evil. All demons are just viewed as just created to be evil. That's their nature, is to be evil. And that wouldn't make any sense. Why would God make something that had no choice other than to be evil? Then they're just doing what God tells them to do, right? Why would they be punished for that, right? So the Islamic concept of Iblis almost seems to be setting the record straight with regards to what really happened. And it makes more psychological sense. And that's just one small tiny thing about Islam that just makes sense and fits in with everything that we can observe. And it's just a small tiny thing. So anyway, I think that answers a few other questions. And that was a question that was also on the poster, I believe, for this event. So I had to make sure it was addressed. Otherwise, someone said, wait a second, what about that question on the poster? So I hope that makes sense. So inshallah, please let's continue. What questions are there?
So right now I'm going to let the brother or the sister iPhone D Iman to ask the question, Allah. Then I'm going to ask the question from right after that. So the person who requested to speak, Allah.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask, because we define God as the two main attributes is infinity and will or volition. But for example, if someone comes and tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wajh, has a face, and so to speak, it has to be defined in some way if it's not taking literally. So if we're talking about some metaphor, or it's just metaphorically speaking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wajh, but not literally speaking, what is the proper Islamic response of this? I know there's many sects like Ash'ira and Maturidi, and that has different interpretations of the attributes of Allah. But according to this, and even for the hand of Allah, if it has to be taken literally, how can we respond to this, Ustadh?
Well, you've probably already noticed from my previous lectures, if anyone who has looked into that. But basically, I limit myself to just being a da'i, right? So I call to generic Islam, right? Not to any particular school of creed. Although some people might misunderstand some of my discussions about this. Say, well, Abdullah, you say that there's no eternality to the eternal past or infinite past, but what about Ibn Taymiyyah discussing that God could have an infinite past, or does have or it's not a problem if he does have an infinite past, and he's always creating from his infinite past. Whereas what I say is what I've actually said is that you can't have an infinite past of changing things that themselves are changing, right? So finite things, but God is outside time. According to some narrations, he is time, meaning he's the one who's making the change. And he exists with no beginning, but not subject to being changed, as in he's not changed. He doesn't live in change, if that makes any sense. He doesn't reside in change. This is all anthropomorphizing of God. I would say that this doesn't exactly disagree with Ibn Taymiyyah. It's just I'm using different language. And I'm not urging anyone to adopt any particular school of Aqidah between these different, the Sha'ira or the Athariya or Al-Hadith or Mu'tazili or others. This is something for scholars to discuss, and for those students of knowledge who are interested to look into what the scholars have said. It's not for me to get involved with advising you to join one or the other, right? I'm only here to call to the generic Islam that we all, the fundamentals that we all agree on. So I won't advise you on that matter. However, I will explain something just to clarify on the question you asked, which is when described that Allah has a wajh or yad, and so on and so forth. The Ash'ira will say it's a metaphor, right? The hand of God or the face of God. Just like in the Quran, it says it refers to a traveler as Ibn Sabil, right? Son of the road or the way. It doesn't mean that you have someone whose father or mother was actually a road or a pathway, right? It's not literal, yeah? So the Ash'ari would say that's what it means. It's a metaphor. And they would say, oh, clearly it's a metaphor. And of course, those who are Athari or for Hadith or however they want to describe themselves as, would say that we affirm that God has these terms. He has these terms as an attribute. So he has a wajh, he has a yad, a face or a hand, if you want to translate it like that. But bila kayf, so we don't say how. We don't say what that means in essence, right? We just because they will say it's just because it says it in the Quran. We don't want to say that's not the case because we worry that we're saying that God is lying when he says he has a wajh, but he doesn't have a wajh, right? So we want to affirm the word, right? Just for that, but we don't know what it means, or we're not going to say X, Y, and Z. I know there's ikhtilaf on Staw al-Arsh. What does it mean when the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described as ascending the throne, or there's an ahadith described that on the Day of Judgment, he'll come to people in a shape that people will recognize. An ahad narration, by the way, but still, meaning it's not definite for Aqidah, for core Aqidah, which all scholars agree on, but it's something that is part of the branches of creed, for the furu of Aqidah, branches of Aqidah, as in, like beliefs you can adopt in essence, and depending on the school of thought, how you'd interpret it. So what does that all mean? Well, generally speaking, again, I'm not here to argue against or call for any particular school of thought, but all I'm saying is that there would be no contradiction, because no one's saying that from eternity past God has had a shape or form that he basically can't change, or is in essential shape. They just say on their judgment, you'll basically see a form that he will come in to engage with you. Will it be his actual essence? Well, they don't say that. That's not his essence, right? They'll just say like a burning bush or a light veiled, what have you. They might say it's similar to that, depending on their interpretations of the Quran, like seeing God like a moon, like you see clearly the moon, from a hadith. Sorry, it's a lot of it is semantical. It's semantical. No one says that in essence God is bounded, right? And no, at all. There are debates as to location. There's God exists as a location here and there, but he's not bounded in anything, right? So he's not bounded in a location, as in by something that encompasses him, that holds him or contains him, in essence. So everyone agrees on that, but it's a semantical debate. And for reasons of my policy of non-sectarianism, as in not sectarianism, but my neutrality on this matter, but only as a da'i, because I think it would be unbecoming and perhaps presumptuous of me to adopt a particular school of thought to invite you to, when that's beyond my job limit, quote unquote, right? So I'm only going to present you the generic aspects of Islam to show that everyone agrees on these very basic things. Up to you to research these things yourself, and if you want to adopt positions on any of these schools of thought, then please do so, but do so after reading all different understandings by different scholars and come to your conclusion based on what you think is the most convincing, and obviously also be sincere as much as you can on the matter.
Next question: is it true the Quran was without dots at the time of the Prophet? I know there's for non-Arabic speakers to recite, but how do we know it was recited that way?
So, diacritical marks. Yes, we're not. Well, I mean, there is some historical discussions as to when diacritical marks appeared, but suffice to say, even if there wasn't diacritical marks at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, in the way Arabic was written, it wouldn't make any difference to the preservation of the Quran. The fact that it was preserved by multiple chains of transmission, both oral and textual, and the fact that you don't have the kind of variants like you'd have in the Bible, where you'd have paragraphs that don't exist in one version but do exist in another, whole sentences that don't exist in one version but do exist in another, and so on and so forth. So I said there's nothing to be concerned about generally, but a lot of the diacritical marks, rules, like we have commas in English and full stops or periods, I believe you call it. These things were useful and brought on to obviously aid, and IR separators and so on, so verse separators in the Arabic. These things were used just to aid reading, as reading aids, basically, as Arabic spread beyond those who were, native speakers, proficient in Arabic, to non-Arabs who were learning Arabic, and it wasn't their native language, and so they needed a bit of help to obviously grapple this language. So we'd only expect that these things would come about, and so on. And now we obviously have harakat, right? So guidance as to how to pronounce and the vowels of consonantal letters in Arabic, right? And now if you don't know Arabic, if you're not conversant with it and you're learning it, those vowelations, those harakat are useful. But Arabic speakers who it's a native language right now don't need harakat. They don't need fatha, kasra, and dhamma, right? They don't need that, or sukun or shadda, so on. And they don't need that. They can read. They recognize the consonantal word, and they will just read it without needing that. But their ancestors didn't even need the diacritical marks, the dots, right? They could recognize it and read it like this. So that's all it is. So you don't have to be too concerned about that.
Next, I'm gonna go to the next question. Could we come to the conclusion of Allah's attributes through rationality? Example: Allah is all truthful, all knowing.
I would say that it depends what attributes you're referring to. So the attributes where the attributes which are, you could say, define what he is, in essence, then like that the fact that he has a will, so he chooses, he decides, and I suppose by derivation, the determiner, the shaper, the measurer, I'm a soul word, and all these things, right? You can come to this rationally, yes. As to the wordings or the names of Allah, obviously you can't, because you don't know what Allah has chosen to name himself in any language, of course, but you can come to that concept, the basic concept that he determined all things, yes. But for example, things like the stoning punishment, right? You wouldn't be able to derive that exactly. You need revelation to derive that. So the official names that he wants to call, he wants humans to know him by in any particular language, you need revelation for that. You just can't assume stuff like that. But you can certainly deduce that he would be all powerful, all knowing, and would have a will, as in the ability to choose or to shape or determine things. Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, in essence, I'm trying to think of attributes in the Quran that you probably couldn't derive rationally. Yeah, like the stoning punishment, the oft forgiving. You couldn't determine whether God, how God would deal with sin, or because you need to have revelation to show you what the laws of the natural law of mankind is, and then you'd have from that revelation you'd have to know how Allah would treat breaches of that law. So you need revelation to show you that kind of stuff. You wouldn't be able to do it yourself. So in essence, through pure rationality, you can only get to a conclusion of he's an infinite creator. He's intended us to be a demonstration of his ability to create. Through all our attributes are a demonstration of his ability to make those attributes, and that we have a natural law that we're meant to live by. What is that natural law? You can maybe deduce the criteria of how to what to expect, and a revelation to fulfill. It needs to have a mark of authenticity, otherwise known as a miracle, right? Because you need to have an authentication mark from the author, right? The same author of the universe, right? So you can deduce that it has to come via messenger. You know it would be optimal if it comes via human messenger, because that's someone you can imitate and emulate. You can deduce all those things, expectations. And then when you encounter the revelation, obviously, if it meets the expectations, great. You can then say, okay, this is what I expect and I can follow it. But the point of revelation is it will tell you stuff that you can't deduce. What is our law? What is the natural law of human beings? What's our natural habitat? What's our natural societal structure? You can't deduce that rationally. The failure of political ideologies to deal with human nature is apt demonstration of that humans can't really encompass. We don't know how to organize human beings in the optimal way, and that's the issue. It's not saying that there's a system that will make humans perfect, because humans can't be perfect because they have to have free will. But what system can organize human instincts and drives and program them with the right software to create the optimal society? Only revelation can provide that.
So before I go on, it's 11 o'clock here in Florida and in the US of A, America. But anyways, I know we have 38 people online on Facebook, but I want to ask everyone: is everyone okay if we were to go for, because we said we're going to finish at 11? Is everyone okay? Let me just get some responses to if we go to 11:30 for another 20-30 minutes. Are you guys up for that? Just let me see if what some people say, inshallah. All right, inshallah. So I'll go ahead to the next question.
Can I just say,
go ahead.
I did promise that if anyone has any questions they want to ask me, or you'd like to challenge me on anything, you don't. I mean, whether you're Muslim or not, I would accept it, because challenges can be useful for everyone else listening. So anything I say you disagree with, or wasn't fully clear, or you just think I've contradicted myself, or I've begged the question on something, and you want to vocalize it, obviously, so everyone can hear, then please do so. I mean, I'm inviting you to do so. It will help everyone to hear that. But if not, then I'll just take the questions as was submitted.
Yeah. So that being said, I will give an opportunity now. Does anyone want to say anything to rebut or go hard at Brother Abdullah Andalusi? Anyone, inshallah? Give it a couple of seconds. You can unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat. So I guess not in the not here, but I can be that person, inshallah, if you want, for a little bit. So one thing that you mentioned, you talked about the afterlife, and you talked about and you also did a whole talk one time about, is hell just? And one of the things that people that bothers a lot of people, it was alluded also in the questions, is the whole concept: why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish humans for eternity if they did sins for a very short amount of time? Why would God, who's all merciful, who created us, and then destined us for punishment, if he already knew that we were going to go to hellfire? So why would God do such a thing? And why would we go burn and burn and burn for eternity? That that doesn't make sense.
Okay, khair, inshallah. So basically, like all things, there are assumptions here. And as I said, all that I'm doing is hopefully wiping away the cobwebs of assumptions that leads people to think there are contradictions or problems within Islam, or that cause them to have doubts. You'll always find it's always just at the root cause, there's an assumption somewhere lurking. So, okay. Why would God make human beings knowing they would go to hell? That assumes that God is some kind of scientist who doesn't know the outcome of the experiment and needs to experiment in order to know the outcome. I assume if that's the intent behind that question, then obviously again that's anthropomorphizing God. That God is somehow a human being that doesn't know stuff and needs to test stuff out. I also mentioned that some of the many causes of polytheism was anthropomorphism. The idea that God is too lofty, that he's like a human, he has a limited attention span. You can't access him directly. He doesn't know what you're doing. You have to go via intercessors, because these intercessors, they will intercede with you and raise your case in attention, or they've been delegated authority or with power, so they can help you out. And whereas God, God is just like, you're too busy, quote unquote. Or they are somehow more merciful than God. Or, I want to go to this particular shrine because whatever sub-deity, stroke saint, stroke local spirit, whatever that's there is like really merciful, nice person, nice guy. And, will show mercy on me and will intercede with me in God, because, surely God wouldn't have mercy. It's like, well, wait a second. God is the merciful and the most merciful, and yet there you are thinking that he's not. And as one hadith said, that Allah will treat you, to paraphrase, Allah will treat you as you think of him. So if you want to think that he's not merciful, then he will not be merciful to you, because he's told us. It's actually you're almost thinking he's a liar or ignoring him, that to say that there's someone else that can be more merciful than God. In the hereafter, or what have you. Likewise, when people look at suffering in this world and they say, "Oh, how can God allow suffering in this world?" I say, well, if the purpose of this world was only this world, if God created us and we would just suffer forever, so he would make us without us doing anything, he just put us straight into suffering forever. What would be the point of that? It would make no sense. Suffering means, or pain means, that you're frustrated in achieving your purpose. So why would God make us with a purpose that would be frustrated no matter whatever we do, forever? Right? That's our end. That's the end of us. No, that would only be the case if this was this universe was the end in itself. If there is another or subsequent universe or reality, whatever you want to call it. Or if you want to use the word universe in its broadest sense, universe just means everything that exists, which means that Jannah and Jahannam would be part of the universe, right? The universe just means everything that exists. So it would just be a different bubble of it, but certainly part of the universe, separated from this part of the universe, but part of it. Anyway, we know there's another reality, or a greater one, or a subsequent one, that is the ultimate end. But here's the thing, which is if you look at, I wrote an article on this, just so you know, where I looked, because this is a very big topic, you could say. I called is held just, a response to secular liberals and atheists. There's a reason why I put liberals and atheists, because the liberal concept is that human beings are independent individuals which are sovereign unto themselves. You own yourself. You are your own person. So then God is just some interloper, like some neighbor that bothers you and is doing bad things to you. And why are you doing bad things to me? How dare you involve yourself in my life, right? This is the mentality that goes to leading people to have doubts about God. Why is he doing this? Why is he being unjust? It's well, wait a second. He's maintaining your very existence right now. He's permitting you to speak right now, to think right now, to go on. Every subatomic particle and smaller, almost to paraphrase verse in the Quran there, is being maintained by God and is known to God, right? So you're not an independent individual. You don't own yourself. If by ownership you mean that you have a right, or that which has a right on you, then God is the only owner of you, basically. There's no other owner of yourself. He's not an interloper. He's who you depend on. And so if you're basically rejecting him, then rejecting your very purpose, then that can only be greeted by what the same thing you'd get in this life if you were to frustrate your purpose in this life too, which is pain or frustration. And the ultimate frustration and pain is Jahannam. And for those people who've chosen, but there are people who they make mistakes and then but they want to go back to worshiping God. They've just veered a little bit off the way. God can greet that with forgiveness if they want to return back. For those who've made God their purpose, but they think that they can get away with maybe not fulfilling that purpose sometimes, taking a small break, and they don't want to seek God's forgiveness, then God can punish them up to a duration of, or in proportion to the significance of the crime that they did, the significance of the crime against their purpose, and then they'll be rewarded afterwards for their general desire to worship God, which they did in all the things. So they're sinners, fallible sinners, unrepentant sinners. But there are those people who have intrinsically chosen to reject God comprehensively. And if they would continue to reject God comprehensively, the reward for them would only have to be, well, then they would be in the afterlife permanently frustrated, as they have permanently rejected God. Now, here's the interesting thing, which is everyone, you might think, well, look, Abdullah, this means that there are people who slip through the net, who won't be worshipping God, who will reject God, and then they will just be rewarded for that by punishment and frustration forever. And what was the point of them? That's a big waste of creation, right? They're just wasting away because they chose to reject God. I mean, there's no how does that glorify God? Well, I mean, it glorifies God in the fact that they were made, their very existence glorifies God, and the fact that everything that happens to them is by the power of God. So that's always going to glorify God on a fundamental level. But even their rejection of God will be rectified and turned into a glorification of God. Why? Because what you read in the Quran was there'll be people who go into Jahannam, right? Go into hell, and they rejected God, and they will say in hell, and here's what the Quran says about this. So Surah 6, ayah 27 to 28. I'm going to do you a favor and copy and paste it. So I'll read it out. The author of the Quran is saying, if you could but see when they will be held over the fire, they will say, would that we were sent back. Then we would not deny the ayat, the signs of our Lord, and we would be of the believers. No, it has become manifest to them what they had been concealing before. But if they were returned, they would certainly revert to that which they were forbidden, and indeed they are liars. And again, another verse of the Quran, which is Surah 40, ayah 11 to 12. We confess, these are people who are in hell. They'll say, we confess our sins. Then is there any way to get out of it, basically? And they'll be said to them, this is because when Allah alone was invoked, you disbelieved, but when partners were joined to him, you believe. So the judgment is only with Allah, the Most High, the Most Great. Here's the thing. So these people who are put in Jahannam, the only time they will ever recognize God and accept him and want to obey him is when they're being punished. And if they were to be taken out of that, they would reject. They would go back to rejecting. In essence, Jahannam is the only place they would worship God. And I want to give you an example from someone all of you will probably know, right? Someone like this. There's someone who basically does whatever they want, and they will hurt whoever they want, and they're selfish, have no empathy or don't care. The only time they will care about how they did to other people is when they've got caught and they're about to be punished, or they are being punished. And they say, "Look, I'm sorry. I know it was wrong. I know it was wrong. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do it. I was wrong. I know I'm wrong. I admit it. Sorry. Give me another chance. I won't do it again." And then when you let them go, or you, so to speak, right? Again, not abduction, no abduction here, just logical abduction. That's the only thing I'm going to advise you to do, right? If you were to not punish them, so to speak, by pointing them to the police or like depriving them of something that they wanted from you. If as soon as you release them, so to speak, from the consequences of their actions, they go back to doing whatever what they were doing before, and they just don't care, right? They just don't care. The only time they'll ever admit they were wrong, the only time, and if someone was to speak to them while they're doing bad things, they will say, "Yeah, I'm going to do it, because I want to do it. I like to do it. I'm being authentic," whatever, right? They'll say it like that, justify it like that, and they only regret when there is punishment, but they don't intrinsically regret what they did. Okay. What do you do to those people? Right? What do you do? Well, obviously you can't do anything, but what should God do to those people? If everyone will worship God, if everyone must worship God, and we will all serve in the end, and that's the point. That these people will only ever worship God or have any consideration for him or have any taqwa for him when they are being punished. And in Jannah, that is the abode of the grateful. Why? Because the people that will go to Jannah will still be grateful after going to Jannah, will still be grateful after going to paradise, and they will still worship him. So everyone will go in the afterlife to the place where they will best worship God. And that is one answer to it. But the revelation with Islam is so elegant. There's other answers which are just as amazing. Secondly, a smaller point is why would someone go to Jahannam for longer than the crime that they took to commit the crime? If you spent 2 minutes killing someone, just 2 minutes killing somebody, does that mean you should go to jail for 2 minutes? Right? Does that mean you should go to jail for 2 minutes? Well, no. It depends on the gravity of the crime. Okay, so what's the gravity of the crime of denying an unlimited, infinite creator his right over you as a creature that he made from nothing to something, right? What is the magnitude of that crime, right? Some people say if you were to slap your friend across the face, some guy or girl, if you're a girl, or slap your mother and father across the face, the action is exactly the same. But why would people say that the latter is greater than the former? Well, it's the significance behind what you've done is much greater, even though the action is exactly the same. So then what would be the case of being ungrateful to the creator of the universe, who's maintaining you, sustaining you, and giving you so many favors? The magnitude of that would be far greater than the time it took you to commit the act in the first place. That is, if you don't repent from it. So anyway, I hope that answers it in a very short way, but a more systematic way is given in that article. And I'll also be covering it with possibly a few more angles in the course, inshallah.
I'm going to go to the next one. when will the help of Allah come for the oppressed Muslim communities of the world? I'm asking this question because all of Muslim parts of the Muslim world have at least one community which is oppressed. You have Kashmir is yours, Muslim in Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, Afghanis, and the list goes on here, yani. And then is there also Islamophobia in the then there's also Islamophobia in the West, and also dictatorship in Central Asia, Arab world, which makes the situation worse.
That is a more political question. I know I already answered something that was kind of similar to that. I would say that well, what does the Quran say about? What does the Creator of the universe say about this? Right? Maybe not about this, but let's say about this generic situation that seems similar to something that seems to match what the author of the Quran has spoken about. So do you think that basically, we'll be made and not be tested with our wealth and our health and our family, right? Do you think that we are going to be not tested, right? That we're going to have a nice, comfortable life where your purpose of life is to go around to fancy locations around the world and take a picture of you drinking artisanal coffee, all right? Is that you think your purpose of life is, right? It's not going to be like that. Secondly, is that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has purchased our lives, He's purchased the lives of the believers, right? We have a mission that we adopted when we said La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to spread Islam and the justice of Islam, which is no other than just the law that manages human nature and the natural law for human beings to mankind, right? That's our job. You're not doing the job that you're signed up to do. So what's going to happen is that God's going to remind you by removing all the things that are distracting you at work. If you have someone that's working at work and they're distracted by, I don't know, Facebook or YouTube or something, and they're not doing any work, you're going to try to remove those distractions. So if your comfortable life is going to distract you from your mission as Muslims, which is to spread the revelation to mankind and ensure everyone gets access to it and the ability to live by it, then Allah's going to remind you by taking away those distractions, which means He's going to make Allah knows best His will, by the way, but it seems to me that an explanation that would seem to fit is that Allah will remind us. But we know there's some ayahs in the Quran that Allah will send punishments that will affect the wider people if you don't command the good and forbid the evil. And we know these are hadiths, so I'm speaking based on that. As to what Allah is willing in this particular case, Allah alone knows best, but it seems to fit with what He's warned us about in the hadith and the verses of Quran and so on. And of course, what did the Prophet Muhammad say? That in terms of the Islamic civilization was meant to be expanding and to fight for justice and defend the borders. And if to paraphrase the narration, I believe, if we were to give up jihad meaning fighting for justice, defending our borders, and spreading Islam to the world against oppressors, those who are oppressing people or killing people and doing bad things, then they'll be attacking us. To paraphrase the narration, they're going to be attacking us, and lo and behold, we've proved the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu right, which is we're being invaded, attacked, persecuted, and so on and so forth, constantly and consistently, and it's not going to get better. I don't think just by doing nothing on that. It's only going to get better when we implement Islam, we unite ourselves, we have a government that represents the Islamic purpose and worldview and world project and takes on it its world project. And then via this government, the government will unite the Muslims and defend Muslims and defend the weak amongst non-Muslims and oppressed, because there are non-Muslims being oppressed that need our help just as much as Muslims. And no one's fighting for them and defending them. And that's meant to be our purpose. And this was all part of bearing witness to God, right? All this was part of our purpose of bearing witness to God, which is people see that we're doing this not for material benefit or ourselves, but we're doing this because there is a creator behind the universe, which we will all be accountable for. And all mankind needs to realize and recognize this purpose, which they have currently forgotten in many parts of the world.
No. So there was a question I was going to ask, but before that, somebody had a follow-up to your question about let's go back up here. Is hell predestined, or are people predestined for hell? And then in the chat, I guess some discussion is taking place about refuting ex-Muslims, and people are putting their own personal opinions. So I think you probably should chime in on that also, how to deal with people who leave Islam within the family. But go ahead, inshallah.
Okay, so when we talk about predestined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls all things and certainly knows everything that will happen, because he's the one that's bringing it about. Now, I'm not going to get into theological debates that exist between Islamic scholars as to, is God outside of time and therefore and he just makes everything already, and everything's already made and created, or he just follows a plan that he's written out, or that his writing out of it is making it come about. These are discussions which are between Islamic scholars and are fascinating, but essentially you only need to know the basics, and the basics is that everything will happen as Allah's planned, and therefore is for all intents and purposes, whatever your theological position, is predestined, right? However, you don't know what that predestination is, but Allah does, and you still have free will. But Allah's knowledge isn't limited by a wait and see approach to your free will, because he knows what your free will is going to do. Remember, he knows hypotheticals, right? His knowledge is not limited to only what happens, right? He knows every decision you'll make freely, because his knowledge isn't limited to requiring determinism, right? That's my point. So he knows what you're going to do, and he creates your actions, as in he permits your actions to come about, right? And therefore there you would do it. So you might be predestined, and he might know exactly where you're going, but you don't know where you're going, and you still have free will. So from all intents and purposes, to yourself, you can still decide, so to speak, with obviously with Allah's permission, where you want to go in the hereafter, right? You want to repent and be a believer and get to Jannah, or you want to reject God and go to Jahannam. For all intents and purposes, this is the choice. This is within your choice, so to speak. But ultimately, obviously, everything happens by Allah's permission, and Allah knows exactly where you're going to go. So there's no contradiction if you basically understand that you're making an assumption that God needs to wait to see for things to happen, to know what they would be like, or that if he knows what they're going to be like, he forces it to happen regardless of whether people have free will or not. That's not the case, because again, we're dealing with an entity, a being that has knowledge beyond, is infinite, and his knowledge is not contained within determinism or causality as we as finite beings experience. So don't anthropomorphize God, right? He's not a creature like us. He's not a finite thing.
All right. So
I forgot there was an ex-Muslim part to that question, so to speak. Okay, I'm going to say something which is, if you don't know how to answer the questions by ex-Muslims, don't engage them in debate. What you can do is, you can, if they obviously speak to you about stuff, which is if they on Twitter or you see their YouTube video of them, don't call in on their phone lines, because they'll make an example out of your ignorance. Trust me, you fuel their phone lines, right? You fuel their videos. Don't do that. Speak to them. If you can answer the question, answer it. If not, you say, I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm going to go and research it, and maybe I'll get back to you, or I'll write an article, or what have you, right? Learn to say when you don't know. Please, don't make it worse. And sometimes you think you know the answer to something, and it's not the case, right? It's just not not the case. You make it worse by making an assumption or a presumption on the matter. I'll give you a typical example. I once appeared on the BBC on a discussion about can you be gay Muslim, right? Now they thought I was going to be some ranting Muslim that would just say, that you can't be gay and Muslim, right? Or homosexual and Muslim, right? But hear me out here, 1 second, hear me out. You had these two sisters on the audience who said, how can you be a gay Muslim, right? Just like you can't. And what the audience heard from that, how they understood it is that if you have a desire in your heart that you don't choose, yeah? And trust me, we all have sinful desires we don't choose, right? You can't say, well, I can't be a Muslim because I've got sinful desires. That's what it sounded like to the non-Muslim audience. Because when they say homosexual or gay, they don't mean someone who actually, it doesn't necessarily mean someone who actually has same-sex intercourse. It just means someone who has a desire or a preference strong enough to be sexually attractive to them, right? As an emotion. So when they said that, thinking they were defending Islam, it made us look worse. It possibly undid some of my work, which I had a more nuanced approach, which is I said that same-sex intercourse is haram. It's a sin, right? But just by having a desire doesn't mean that you're going to go hell just because you have a desire, right? And we know it's from the hadith. Allah has forgiven us our desire, the whisperings of our nafs. Yeah, as long as you don't act on it, the bad ones, right? As long as you don't act on it, yeah? So it was a bit nuanced. So when you use the word homosexual, you have to, it's not precise. And therefore, when Muslims were jumping in to explain it, they were making a mess. Other things they do when someone says, what's wrong with same-sex intercourse between two consenting adults? And then Muslims say, well, the reason why it's wrong is because it spreads disease and that is that really the argument that the Quran uses or the Hadith uses against it, right? It's not. You're speculating, yeah. And then what if they can show, if it's possible to show that it doesn't cause damage or it doesn't cause harm by disease, then you're stuck, yeah. And many Muslims get doubts from this, right? They have doubts based on this because they've heard the wrong argument. Or their argument, they've made the assumption or they've been taught the assumption. So now I brought it up, I must answer, of course. Here's what the argument. Here's how you should present it from. And this is a Quranic argument. It's a straightforward argument, right? And if you want, you can just be clever of how you say it. So it's a good way. When I clever, as in use modern language to explain the Quranic concept. So basically, they'd say you say to them, what is bad? What would be a crime between two adults? What would be a crime? They say, well, non-consensual sex would be a crime. Say, okay, why is non-consensual sex a crime? And they will say, well, because you're violating someone's rights or whatever. Okay, but what rights are you violating? Yeah, like why is it wrong? In essence, I want to know why. Break it down. Don't just accept the concept. Ask them the question. Why is it wrong? They'll say, well, look, it's your body. No one should have the right to do to your body anything you don't consent to. Say, because you are the owner of your body. I say, okay, so you're saying that it is wrong to touch someone's body without the consent of the owner of the body. And I say, yeah. Right, you see where I'm going with this? Right? Okay, well, did you make yourself? Then when they'll say, no. Did you create yourself in any way, shape, or form? Did you buy yourself from the creator of yourself? Right? And I'll say, well, no. So then how do you own your body? Where did you get this idea in the cosmos that you own your body, that you own yourself? Yeah, and if you're arguing against a materialist, you can have some more fun, which is you are a collection of matter. What is doing the owning, right? Are you saying an object can own itself, or a bunch of matter can own itself, right? What does that say? What's doing the owning, right? So in essence, they would, they wouldn't be able to philosophically justify why they own themselves. Well, I have a basis. The creator of the universe and owns you, and he doesn't give you consent to use his property or misuse it in ways that he doesn't, that is not in accordance with the law that he stipulated as for us as a creation. There you go. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I don't know if people follow that.
Yeah, I think there was a thought. And how about when it comes to family members? Like, you know, don't you have family members who leave Islam, or what are the how did you deal with those situations in those cases?
Well, I mean, I would say, a lot of this should be asked of experts who are counselors, and because family matters are something that obviously are a little more sophisticated than the intellectual matters that I usually deal with. And while I have obviously had some experience with this, I would never purport to be an authority on this matter, and I could only ever give you advice that carries no more authority than your neighbor or something, some average guy on the street. Yeah, so I don't think I could ever give you advice that has any authority on the matter, other than engaging with what is causing that person to have doubts. And sometimes what's causing that person to have doubts is not necessarily intellectual, because humans are they have parallel processes, right? They have aql and nafs, and so we're meant to have that, and there's a wisdom behind that. It's a necessity to have that. The nafs is a much faster processor than the aql, because you have to have instinctual reactions that are quicker, right? But also more powerful, and hence the battle between aql and nafs is such that you have one that can make conceptual models, and the other one enacts pre-programmed subroutines that are meant to be for quick reaction to events. It helps you survive. Anyway, so some people have nafsiyya problems with Islam, or at least the Islam that was taught to them, or at least they live in a situation that might be unjust and unfair, and they're just taught like, oh, be patient, just be patient. This is what Islam, you must be patient according to Islam. And the word patience means to them, do nothing, right? Just do nothing. Not try to be proactive in a positive way, or find a good strategy around this, or think a way of how to resolve the situation in the best way possible. No. Sabr means do nothing. When in Quran and Sunnah, sabr doesn't mean do nothing at all. Sabr just means being steadfast, doing the same actions to do good, but staying on those actions, like sticking to those good actions until you get the result you want. So basically, it's persistence or steadfastness in doing the good things, not being passive and doing nothing. So again, more assumptions are there which cause people to have these problems. So it depends what's making them leave Islam. So I would say that the best way against doubts is to inoculate yourself firstly with knowledge, and to speak to non-Muslims or ex-Muslims. Don't always approach them by saying you've sold out Islam for the West or what have you, because like no one's going to say, oh, now you put it that way, you're right. Okay, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu Muhammad rasulullah. Is that going to happen? It's not going to happen like that, right? That's not it's like saying to someone who's jahil that you're jahil. They're not going to say, oh, well, you're right, you've got a point there. They're not going to say that, right? They're going to think you're arrogant, or they're going to think that you're just insulting them. You're going to be being defensive. No. All you can do is you do the same to them as you would do with non-Muslims. You draw the straight line next to the crooked, right? You make clear to them, okay, look, what is your issues? Is it a personal problem, a family problem, a social problem? Maybe we can resolve that. What is causing you to have these problems emotionally? Or is it just an intellectual problem? So are you just having something that's perplexing you and having doubts? And you need to learn yourself. You need to challenge your own assumptions as well. and encourage Muslims to also study Islam from obviously challenging their assumptions. Otherwise, you have to inoculate them with rationality, with some people call it critical thinking, but it's just rationality and understanding, basically. And that's the only way I can recommend. But understanding, you must be understanding with people who are calling themselves ex-Muslim or non-Muslim, because for many times they do it. Some of them do it because they generally don't have good answers from Islam. And I tell you this: if it wasn't for my persistence, I made the mistake at a young age of only 4 years a Muslim, and I fell into perhaps Speaker's Corner in London, where you had all kinds of anti-Islam Christians, these really rabid evangelicals who were the predecessors of these guys you might see on YouTube, and they were saying similar stuff you never even heard of. There was someone had this they wrote articles saying 1,001 mistakes in the Quran. I was like, 1,001 mistakes in the Quran? What? I wasted a lot of paper. I printed out all of it. This is back in the day, in the 90s, yeah. So it was the era of printing stuff out, and I started to go through it, and even with my little knowledge, I saw mistakes or problems in this so-called article saying there was mistakes in the Quran, even with my limited knowledge. But I fell into the deep end of people, which I would recommend Muslims do not fall into the deep end with if you're prone to having doubts. But it sharpened me because I started to ask questions and I started to investigate. But I would say that you need to investigate and ask the questions from right now, because it will only help you and improve your understanding and improve you as a Muslim, and allow you to actually better understand how to apply Islam in the world. That's a general answer, but basically, don't react emotionally to ex-Muslims or and so on, or non-Muslims generally. But try to calmly ask them intellectually what their issues are, and if it's a nafsiya issue, if it's an issue that they let's say maybe a woman was married to an abusive husband, the husband tried to claim that Islam permits him to be a bad husband, which it doesn't, then explain to her how that it wasn't Islam that made him do that. Right, and it was wrong, and so on and so forth. That's how you need to approach. Right, no one has ever benefited by aggressive responses to people, and many of them come back to Islam with further research and thinking. Of course, there are people who left Islam for other reasons. That it's just they've chosen willfully to disregard any possibility of there being a creator, because they just don't. They want to enjoy themselves with short-term material pleasures, and these people are the true rejectors. And of course, you can't do anything for them. But there are many people who would be Muslim if it wasn't just, would come back to Islam if it wasn't just for proper explanation of Islam to them. So I hope that gives you some kind of an answer anyway to have to do.
Yeah, I know we said 11th, but this is a question I want this ask. It's a pretty long question, so is it okay if I ask it real quick, inshallah? And the question is, with the rise of, I guess, e-learning, there has been a lot of progress in the field of, technology and networks, or neural networks, which are the kind, but not exact hierarchies in the human brain, having managed to learn things in a surprisingly accurate manner. The question is, there's a quote by this mathematician, Stuart G-Man, which is quoted a lot in this field. The world is compositional, or God exists. What that means, there is inherent compositionality and structure in the world and within our brains, layers of neurons, and this is how infants learn. If this structure did not exist, then some higher intelligence was the reason why these infants learn what they learn. When these neural networks began to learn awesome stuff in the past decade, these researchers triumphantly concluded and mentioned in their keynotes that, see, there is compositionality, and therefore God does not exist. How do we intellectually counter this line of thinking?
Okay, so a computing question. Many people are confused by the terms artificial intelligence because they don't know what it means. Certainly, they don't know what the word intelligence means. Not in a derogatory way, but I mean literally, definitionally. Most people who speak English will probably not be able to define intelligence as a word generally. And therefore artificial intelligence, which sounds, and we say, oh, we're intelligent, and artificial intelligence, it means that, you know, there's a non-living inanimate thing that can have intelligence just like us. You know, does not challenge our ideas of the soul or consciousness or so on and so forth. First and foremost, no, it does. Firstly, I don't see how they jump from just because things are compositional that there must that can also be explained by there being no God, right? The jump isn't clear, right? They just make a jump thing, trying to saying that it just means, oh, there's no need for God because the universe is just independently by itself, compositional, and therefore there's no need for God. What I will say is, evolutionists would argue that the minds of creatures or ourselves were constructed in such a way that to make sense of a world that was the way it was, and so whatever the world was going to be like, we were always going to be able to make sense of it as a necessity for survival. Right? So that they would, materialists could counter that against these particular materials. They're against each other. But to understand artificial intelligence, it is a mindless process. I'm going to give you an analogy to understand it, so you know what it's referring to. So, imagine you had imagine you had a classroom filled with kids, and they don't know how to speak Chinese. So you start bringing in Chinese characters on square blocks and just putting them down and tell them each to guess what it means, what the Chinese character means. So they all make guesses, guess, and most get it wrong, some get it right. So then you chuck out those who got it wrong, and you keep those who get it right, and then you bring more in, and you give another character, and you keep this process going until those who get it right, not once they get it right, maybe get closer to the truth, the meaning, the guess about what the Chinese character means, are the closest out of all of the students. So you keep doing that process again and again and again and again and again with people who don't really know what these characters mean generally, but they just tend to get the guesses. They get more and more better guesses, right? Due to randomness, because each student might have a random preference, random guessing ability, and what have you. So you just happen to get. You only leave those who basically get the closest, the top tier, top 10%, and then you run the process again and again and again and again and again. And if you keep doing it, you'll get to a point where you'll have someone after tens of thousands, 100,000 of guesses that will get consistent guesses on the Chinese characters, or even maybe most of the time knowing what they knew beforehand. So knowing that, for the 10,000 times, this character looks like this, and they got it almost right. So this character looks similar to that, might be related to it, and so they learn by their guesses. But essentially, it's a process of randomness and selecting or survival of the fittest made into a computational form, right? If that, for want of a better way of explaining it. So that's all it is. You might know it when you're asked to authenticate to yourself as a real person, not a bot, by those called captcha. It's called captcha squares, where you have to say select. If you prove you're not a bot, select how many cars are the squares that have cars in it, or that kind of stuff. In essence, they train the AI computer to recognize cars, not by recognizing it conceptually, but by getting the rough general shape by this trial and error process, where in essence you're using randomness and survival of the fittest to create a program that will recognize shapes, or recognize or fit the shape, and so on and so forth. And that's a very simplified way of explaining artificial intelligence. There's no actual intelligence being operated on or being used, and so on and so forth. So there really is no intelligence. There's no intelligence, but it's called artificial intelligence because they say, oh, we can make these really complicated switches called computers to be able to simulate output similar to someone who is intelligent, or to intelligence, right? That's basically what it is. It's a simulacra. It's not real intelligence. Again, I don't see the jump between just because there's compositionality that means there's no God. I don't in the universe. I don't see that at all. And other materialists could counter that, could make a counter argument if they were so inclined. Anyway, that our minds developed. They would argue to recognize the and make sense of the external inputs that we're receiving from the world to better survive in the world, almost like the process of artificial intelligence on biological creatures, right? Yeah, but again, there's some problems with that, major problems with that. But again, the logic doesn't flow. It doesn't connect. So maybe if you want to show me a more sophisticated argument that they bring to show that connection, or if there is none, then I suppose there's none. But if there's more sophisticated argument they bring, then I'm open to hearing it. But I still haven't heard any that would follow. The conclusion would follow from those premises.
Jazakumullah khair. May Allah bless you, reward you for your time, and mashallah, yani it's been 4 hours. May Allah reward you, yani, and immensely for your time and effort, and all those who stayed along the whole time. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're able to continue these things and have these discussions, inshallah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Jazakallah khair, and inshallah we'll see.
I think are a very good resource that we don't have much of. So for whoever's interested, you did reference in your presentation a few articles you've written where you were able to break it down, and it could help somebody who may be more visual than auditory learner to have that as a reference. But also, as you were saying, a lot of us will struggle with some of these issues in a discussion. So it's good for everybody to kind of save on your hard drives, good resources just generally. So I would advise people to look up some of your publications and writings, and you have a pretty well organized website with some of them. So Jazakallah khair for that. And I would suggest that people familiarize themselves, or at least give themselves access to your previous writings.
So, barakallah feek, brother, for obviously staying the course this long, and for obviously listening, and obviously for the organizers, jazakallah khairan, for inviting me. And as I said, like I tried to answer as many questions as possible, time permitting, because I wanted it to be as thorough as possible. And inshallah, as I said, if ever you need any more kind of such sessions, maybe if you want to focus on any particular topics and things, or discuss, I think usually there's a problem with liberalism and secularism, and also more right-wing and left-wing ideologies, which are neither from Islam. Then those, inshallah, I'm also happy to obviously help discuss those matters. But barakallah feekum, and once again for organizing this, and inshallah I hope to work with you again in the future, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. And it's a special shout out to Team USF. Jihad Jum'ah, Zayd Jurayda, who's also the co-host from Team USF, and all those who participate in System 1. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you all for putting this together. And inshallah we'll continue some of this in the future. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.